Hello, everybody. So nice to be here. Dana is a dear, dear friend. She's a great teacher. You can ask any Syracuse student about her legendary course in Ulysses. But most importantly, and what we're here to celebrate tonight, is that she's a great American writer. What makes her a great American writer? Well, her knowledge of and her obsession with the details of our culture and the dazzling, rich, fact-filled sentences it produces that sometimes seem like science fiction, but are always rooted in the real and which read because of their concentrated intensity, like poetry. 2, the sense of love for life that this prose generates. I always think of the word fondness in connection with her work. She's fond of the world and fond of the people in it and fond of us, her readers. 3, the great sense of curiosity and urgency behind her work. The sense that this writer believes in the novel, believes that a good novel can enrich our lives and minds and make life more interesting. 4, Dana asks the big questions. How does love manifest in such a fallen world? What are we supposed to do with all the love and interest and curiosity we feel? What do you do when all that love and interest and curiosity, our obsessions, our passions, get us into trouble? I always come out of her work glad that I live in this time and place, more interested in the problems and beauties of our particular era. When I read a Spiotta sentence, any sentence, I feel her behind it, rooting for the world, acutely tuned to its frequencies, skeptical but not cynical, a great heart, trying to make sense of the life we're living down here, sending her readers back out with a renewed sense of engagement. She is, in short, that rarest sort of artist, a genuine celebrator. And I'm very glad we have the chance to, in turn, celebrate her tonight and her wonderful new novel, Wayward. Dana, you there?
Thank you, George, for that amazing introduction.
Hi. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I'm up here in Corlitos, California, up in the mountains on satellite internet. So I apologize for the glitch in the video. And I think also there's a little delay. So Dana and I are going to try to work with it, but it's me, it's not you, listeners. Dana, congratulations on the book. It's so wonderful. I just have been loving it. I've read it twice and it absolutely holds up and even expands on the second reading. Can you tell us a little bit about the very first seed of the book? Like, what was the first time this book started to occur to you as something to do?
Well, I had, I think it was 2 things. The first thing was my own sort of insomnia that came from perimenopause. And it seemed cruel that this occurred right when you're sort of most needed in your life. My daughter is a teenager, my parents are aging, and the demands are increasing just as your body is starting to do this crazy stuff. And I thought, a lot of women must be experiencing this, but we don't talk about it enough. So I thought, I want to write a character who's going through some of these things. And then I had this weird, so this was about right around 2016, and the terrible election happened. And so I kind of thought, okay, that is maybe one of the inciting incidents here that's going to make this person I had not really clearly seen yet, kind of blow up her life. And I think at first I thought it was going to be that her husband left her. And then I quickly thought, that's kind of a cliche of, that's like unmarried woman or something. What if she leaves, you know? And so that was kind of the first step, is that she just leaves, and trying to figure out why she leaves her family, her very comfortable life. And there is a house near me that's falling apart about 7 blocks west of here that I walk by, and I thought, okay, she falls in love with that house. She doesn't fall in love with a man, another lover or something. She falls in love with that house, and she buys it very cheaply, because in Syracuse, you can buy a house for like $38,000. Actually, some houses you can buy for $12,000. They're very falling down. And so she signs a contract and then realizes on the way home that she's leaving her husband. I thought that was kind of an interesting problem. And then I just thought, escalate, consequences from there.
So because I know there are a lot of writers in the audience, that process that you just described so beautifully, is it the kind of thing that happens one day and you outline it, or is it a gradual series of revelations, or how does that very coherent outline unfold in real time?
Well, I mean, I think what I do is I kind of have ideas and I might throw things into a little bin that catch my attention, and it's very messy and very loose. And I sort of think, what do these things have to do with each other? And then at some point, and I pulled these out for this book, I start these notebooks. And this one it has to be this is a science notebook. This is the kind I like. I actually buy these at the Colgate bookstore. And I start just writing down notes, not anything that would be in the book, but just sometimes it's words, sometimes it's characters, sometimes it's situations. It might be ideas, like this one says daughter/mothers. Another one says old women. Another one is post-menopause. And sometimes I'll just play with words. I'll look up their etymologies and I'll kind of think about, well, what does this word really mean? Why am I interested in it? And I keep this notebook as I go forward. And I don't really start writing until I feel a kind of urgency in a scene that grabs me, a voice really. And it's not until I have the voice, and it can be an internal consciousness voice, or it can be a speaking voice in a dialogue. But once I hear the voice of the character, then who they are starts to grow. So I don't have a very clear idea. I try to pretend that I do, but I mostly just have like a sort of inaugural situation, right? And it was very unclear to me whether it was going to be, I think that it was going to be Syracuse in particular, or was I just going to describe a place like Syracuse and it would have a different name? It wasn't clear to me whether it was going to be a first person or a third person. Pretty soon I resolved third person. And then once I started writing Sam's chapters, who's the main character, I would say, I really decided one day, what does her daughter think of this? This daughter that she misses, because her daughter stops speaking to her once she leaves. She stupidly leaves, blows up her life, not thinking her daughter will just come with her. And her daughter says, no, I'm staying with dad. So, and I'm not talking to you because I'm so angry at you. So I needed to hear her voice. And once I started having Allie's voice, Allie starts speaking, and then I realized, oh, she's up to a lot of stuff. Who is this kid, right? And she's in this secret relationship, and so the narrative really comes out of the character's voice, if that makes sense, and the situation you put them in, the pressure you put. I always have that view of like turn towards jeopardy, like put your characters in jeopardy, and that seems to be a good strategy. What's the thing that would undo this person? And sort of make them reveal themselves. So there is, as I'm writing, I'm thinking those questions too, right?
That's a great turn towards jeopardy. That is a great mantra. Speaking of voice, and especially of Sam's voice, one of the things I have loved about your work over the years is that you are really great at making wildly intelligent and interested characters. They're not less than us. They're actually sometimes even ahead of us. And one of the ways you do that is with these deep dives that you do into researching the culture and sort of palpable love you feel for it. I wonder if you could read something to us, maybe from page 27, just so we can get a sense of what Sam sounds like and how she thinks.
Okay, so this section is when after the election, before she's left her husband, she's trying to find answers on Facebook or find community on Facebook. So this is part of she gets into these what we call rabbit holes, right? So that's from this section. Sam ended up where she found herself because the path to the point is never clear in retrospect and also never ending. Invited to join a series of odd groups. women only mostly, but also niche groups, surviving the Anthropocene, which Sam discovered was a prepper group, but on the political left, preparing for the climate apocalypse. The suggested canning, fermentation, and preserving seemed to exist at the Venn diagram crossover of far right and far left. Because if you were prepping for a racial Armageddon, a federal crackdown, or an environmental disaster and the consequent social meltdown, you will need a significant stockpile of preserved food. Although Sam did not can or preserve, she applied to join. Her admission to this group led her to myriad homesteading groups, urban homesteading, posts about the legalities of keeping chickens in a city and how to grow a vertical garden on your fire escape, off-the-grid co-ed homesteading groups focused on practical whole earth catalog type skills from Morse code communications and well digging to sundial timekeeping, osmosis water purification, and first aid, and a plethora of women-only anti-tech homesteaders dedicated to living as if it were the past with a specific cutoff date, such as 1912 or 1860. Interesting year choice on that. As far as Sam could tell, these tech restrictions involved a lot of posts about sewing denim, mastering hand-cranked washing machines, and the challenges of butter churning and molding, as well as many posts detailing the satisfaction and empowerment of hands-on housekeeping, or HOH. Yet somehow living as a 1912 woman or as an 1860 woman involved being on Facebook a lot. Sam wanted to post a damning quote about the suffocations of housework from Elizabeth Cady Stanton or the feminine mystique, or just simply post, chosen drudgery is a form of feminist slumming, or out of the house and onto the ramparts, bitches. But why pick a fight? Women join the groups to be with others who agree with them, to get tips, to post pics, to support their life choices, so what? But something about Facebook brought out truly juvenile impulses, which Sam had to actively repress. It got worse. The ye olde homemaker groups led Sam predictably to some of the quiverful groups, explicitly anti-feminist and pro-huge families, because the Bible apparently has a metaphor about babies as arrows in a quiver. Since most of the participants were proselytizers, we need more and more quivers full of baby Christians. It was an open, even welcoming group. Sam didn't join, but she wasted a lot of time lurking and digging into the quiver posts and comments. She learned that they were largely inspired by a book called Mothering is God's Career for You, My Journey from Lonely Businesswoman to Happy Mommy. Sam thought of ordering it and hate reading it, but then she thought no. Posts tended towards selfies of rosacea-faced, long-haired women in old-style prairie dresses and a lot of pregnancy crowdsourcing about progesterone and wild yams. So what, if that's what they believe? Laughing at them was a shabby use of her time, but she knew part of what made Facebook and the internet really addicting was simultaneously indulging your own obsessions while mocking, deriding, denouncing even the obsessions of others from the safety of your screen. It was hard to resist, and indulging this impulse, even silently to yourself, made everything worse, made you worse. She was sure of it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for reading that. So I'm struck by the poetry of that, how it's so full of specifics, and some of them seem they could be real, some seem like they couldn't be real. So tell me two things. First of all, about the process by which you gather up those examples, the research. And then second of all, how do you go about constructing prose like that once it's time to do business?
Well, for this portion, I do a lot of immersion in whatever subculture I'm interested in. And so for this one, I went and stayed with my cousin in California for 3 days, and she's very involved in Facebook, and she's a middle-aged woman. And I knew that since I'm not, her algorithm would work much better than mine in terms of what it would suggest. So she let me kind of go over her shoulder for a few days. And then she would send me screenshots of arguments that people were having, of different groups, of sort of what she found. And she has a great sense of irony. So she picked good ones to send me. And so then when I write those down and read them, then I start making up my own. And one of the things in here, this book, Mothering is God's Career for You, I thought that was a real book that I read somewhere, but then the fact checker's like, no, that's not real. You must have made that up. So I searched the internet to try to find it again. So sometimes I don't remember what I made up and what's real, but I think it's a good strategy to mix the real and the imaginary. It makes the imaginary seem more real, and it makes the real seem more artificial. And that's a kind of interesting tension that you get. And it's fun. It's fun to do that. It's fun to find those things. And then I think there's something really poetic for me as a prose writer about lists. It's like the closest place where prose gets toward poetry, because you kind of get these rhythms as you're writing, and you have a pattern, but you want to vary the pattern, and it becomes very intuitive. And then and of course you can go too far, and it will become boring. So that challenge, it just gives you like a little mini formal challenge to kind of place yourself in. And anytime you have a constraint like that, it's an opportunity for creativity, I think.
That's beautiful. So now this might be, one step too far into insider baseball, but so the day that you're going to start writing that passage, are you sitting there with lists, or do you feel confident that by then you've taken in what you need and you can just sort of resort to musicality?
So it's both. So I would kind of read over these things, the lists I had made, things I'd made up, things that were real. A lot of times I'll put all the real things in quotation marks, and then I'll have the imaginary things not in quotation marks, so I remember which is which. And I'll be playing with it. And at some point, some critical mass happens, and I'll just go and do a draft of it. And then I'll fill in later more. So the way that I use research, and this is true for when I write about the Oneida community later in the book, or anything that does really require a lot of background, or when I write about the libertarian development guy, or when I write about the bodybuilders, I do want to inhabit those subcultures and that language, but it is always filtered through a consciousness. So it has to be what Sam would notice, what Sam would find interesting. It's really has to be through the character. So if there's something she gets wrong, or a judgment that she makes, it's really watching what she notices as I'm writing kind of gets me to the payoff, which might be that moment where she's like, no, I don't want to do that. And so she, in the novel, decides, no, I don't want to be in any of these Facebook groups, like, no. And she goes towards this more real life resistance idea. But she, yeah, and the fact that, so it's this weird combination of what I notice and what the character notices, or what I notice through the character, which would be different than what I would notice if I wasn't writing this character. It's only interesting because it's the character, right?
Right.
What she picks out and what she responds to, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that's one of the powerful things in your work, is that you get the density of contemporary experience, but you don't mock it. You're actually, as I said in the introduction, even when you're making these long lists that are kind of mind-blowing, you're celebrating. And I think that must have something to do with the depth of the research that you do. It's really such a comfort to hear those things and maybe be a little bit unsure of what to think about them at first, and then to be reminded that this is not Dana, this is Sam having a particular take on that. Let me ask you this: when you are you a suffering writer? In other words, when you're working, what state of mind are you in? How are you making decisions line to line? How do you know on a given day if it's going well? That kind of thing. Can you describe the kind of cartoon bubble over your head as you're working?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of you have that feeling. It's definitely true that there's sometimes you have a feeling of flow, right? Where things are coming together and you can feel it as you're working on it. But often I have this other feeling, which is that this is terrible and I'll fix it later. That is often the feeling that I have. And, and so let me just get to the end of this. And then, and so what I do is I try to write in the morning when my head is clear. I mean, I have like 3 good hours of brain, usually between 4:30 and 7:30 in the morning. And I try not to waste that time. Sometimes because of menopause, I would get up at 3 in the morning and I would work on it. And I would just say, you know what, I'm not going back to sleep. I'll just go work on this. I'll just go write about something. And there's this kind of something about that state where you've just woken up, where you kind of have a little bit less of that editorial mind and more of that intuition. But then I always read over what I've written And sometimes you can do that in the afternoons with your more ordinary brain. And I'll sort of notice things and take notes in these notebooks again in this about, oh, what if this happened? What's this mean? Why am I keep using that word? Oh, don't, you know, that kind of thing. And then when I go to the morning, that stuff will be with me, and I'll kind of tinker with what I was working on the day before and start to try to make it better. So I do revise as I go along. And especially when I get to the end of a scene, I'll go back to the beginning of the novel, the whole thing that I have, and I'll read everything before I start the next scene, because I want to hold everything in my head, all the language, all the rhythm, all the feel. And I kind of write it. The notebook is a huge mess where I'll just randomly put anything in. Like I have an idea for a scene, I'll just put it in. I have a line of dialogue, I'll just put it in. And then, and when I get stuck, I'll go to the notebook and look at it. But a lot of times that's just then that moment where you go and you say, okay, what's next? Try this, do that. And so there's a weird kind of revision that's happening as you go. And I think the flaw with this method, which you will probably guess, is that when you get to the end, you've revised the beginning a lot more than you've revised the end. But weirdly enough, because you're so into the novel, when you get to the last third, like it's possessing you and it's such an obsession, that the end always needs less revision, because you're so much more constrained, and you know so much more of what you're doing, and you're so present to the text that you're making fewer mistakes. And there's way more that you have to fix that you kind of got wrong, from timeline things to just things that just didn't work that you need to fix from the first 3 quarters, I think.
Yeah, and this book has such a beautiful, daring ending, and you can kind of feel that all the work you did at the beginning sort of painted you into a corner. Like you knew the questions that were being asked, you knew what we were wondering about, and then you just went for it. It was really beautiful. You know, one of the many aesthetic thrills of the book is when you pivot to Allie's voice, which I kind of didn't expect. And you know, to write from a teenage girl's point of view is daring and I suppose challenging. So I wonder if you could read us a little sample of Allie thinking.
Yeah, I will. Allie, as I said, kind of came up, and I was thinking about myself at 17, even though Allie is not me, but I was thinking of 17 is such a dangerous age, because your brain is as good as is so smart. You're just so smart. Your brain is working 100%, and you know nothing. You have no experience. But you don't know that you know nothing. You think you know, but you don't. So it's a very, I think, vulnerable, dangerous period. So this is Allie. This is short. She's thinking about this man that she's starting to see secretly. Sex was another thing that was not at all what everyone said it was. It wasn't informed consent like in health class, a script of can I and yes. It was a suicide pact, and equal danger and transgression on both sides was part of what made it exciting. They both needed jeopardy for the connection to be equal. On her side, she could get found out by her parents. She could get pregnant, and if she sent him photos, he would have them, could make some kind of revenge porn out of them, because the texting was going to include photos, wasn't it? They both knew without saying that photos came with the text. The thought of it, of the transgression, was part of the blooming feeling. The one thing everyone had drilled into her since 5th grade was not to send anyone naked photos ever. Don't believe boys when they promise they'll never show them to anyone, or that they will delete them. But, and in this she was romantic, really, even if it sounded otherwise, she would send him photos. What was the point of sex and love if you didn't trust the other person completely? If you were already gaming out the breakup and the after fallout, then you were just acting in bad faith. She had read her Sartre, but she had also read her Kant, and she had read her Rawls, or in any case, she had read their Wikipedia pages, which were quite extensive. She knew what bad faith was. What all the concerned adults advised was degrading, crude, such as if you send a naked pic, never show your face with your body. Again, so cynical. They actually want you to disembody yourself, separate your identity from your body to protect you. Everything is doomed if you expect so little of the world, if you expect so little of other people. Besides, what are they protecting you from, even in the scenario that the snap finds its way out from his phone into the wider spheres of the internet? the humiliation, apparently profound and suicide-inducing, of having your body exposed to be shown in a private act of desire. The message is clear. Our private self must be a source of shame, and the photo will last forever, they warn. You can never scrub it once it's unleashed, which used to terrify her. But she no longer felt that way, terrified. On the one hand, they said they want the culture to be body positive, but when you get down to it, the concerned adults are very wary of your body.
That's wonderful. Oh, I love that she's completely there. There's not a trace of condescension, but just her full presence. It's really beautiful. And I thought what that did for me was it just ratcheted the whole thing up a level, because if I had been thinking there's an adult woman and a teenager, suddenly they were equalized, and they were just two characters who were full of desire, and it's really wonderful. Let me just pivot a little bit and ask you this. If we could go back and get to know Dana at, say, 7 years old, what would we see in your little mind that would indicate that you were going to be an artist? I mean, your young mind, not your little mind, your child mind.
I was talking to my mother, and she was reminding me that when I was a big reader, like many writers, a really, really obsessive reader. We moved around a lot. I was not a writer. I didn't write. I kept journals from a pretty young age, from about 5th grade on. I was religious on journals, which I gave up when I started writing fiction, oddly enough. But I was a big reader, and I was a weird, obsessive reader. So I was really into these Irving Stone novels. Do you remember, like The Agony and the Ecstasy? And he would write these big historical
oh, wow.
commercial things. And I was really into those. And there was one about Abigail Adams. And I was just like walking around pretending I was in that world. And my mom said that I was like wanting to drink tea and just pretend. I really liked losing myself in books. So I think that curiosity, I really like that you could find out about other people and other times and other places by reading. And so to be able to do that, to kind of, it's so lonely to be a human sometimes. And here's this object that, even when the author's dead, can connect you to people, other people. I thought that was just about the best thing.
Yeah, it sounded like it was real to you at an early age. Was there a moment when it hit you that this writing thing is what you were going to do with your life?
I still can't believe that I'm a writer. Honestly, just seems like too crazy.
Were there mentors along the way that really that helped you?
I always had great teachers. I did have a 5th grade teacher. I wrote like a little essay in 5th grade that was about playing with my brother. There was a house being built across the street, and they weren't working very quickly on it, and they had all this like dirt and stuff, and we spent the whole summer with our Army guys, which were, I don't know why we were playing with Army guys, but we were, and we were building tunnels, and we had all these stories that we would tell, and I wrote about that in this essay. And the teacher I could tell when I was writing it. It was the first time where I was like, oh, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing itself. Like, I'm getting at what it was like to play in this. I'm describing it with words, and I could feel that, like, this is real. And then my teacher felt the same thing and encouraged me. And I was like, oh, so that's the feeling that you're trying to get, that feeling of reality. Like, you believe in what you're doing as you're writing it, like in almost, even though of course it's just words. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. What a beautiful description. I know, again, the writers in the audience, and I know when I was starting out, what I would like to know is this: if we could go back and read some of your early work, say your pre-publication work, and then read that against, say, your first book, what did you learn in that interim? What's the difference between you unpublished and you published? If that's a fair question.
I was
or
not
your style.
Yeah, I was not very good at I think my early attempts to be serious about fiction were very much trying to be like other writers. And I think the breakthrough for me, which I think is just part of the process, was just sort of writing what I wanted to read, really admitting to myself what I thought was fun to read, and doing that instead of trying to impress some writing teacher or somebody else. I had been taking these classes from Gordon Lish, these famous classes, and one thing I learned from him, he did not think I was a good writer, but one thing I learned from him was that you kind of need to figure out what your project is, figure out what you love, and then go there. I mean, what he thought was beautiful was not always what I thought was beautiful, but what did I think was beautiful? What moves me in a work of fiction? And then just being, then going in that direction instead of trying to be a kind of writer that you're not, because you think that would be, oh, it'd be so great if I could write that kind of a book, So letting go of those pretensions, I think, just sort of going where you're really, the little corner of the world that you do inhabit. And I think that another piece of advice was another writer told me was pay attention to the things that fascinate you and what you notice in the world. And that's where your energy is. And he also said that there's things that nobody else knows about the world. What are those things? And I had them like on my bulletin board, and I had and that was kind of helpful. Each one of us has those things that we notice that nobody else notices. And the amazing thing about fiction is that when you put that in a book, the ideal moment, or when you read in a book where something is both recognizably familiar, like, yes, I recognize that, but I never thought of it that way before. That dual feeling of of something new, revelatory, but something also true and familiar. Getting that little friction is very exciting. And so I think a lot of that is, it's not writing what you know or writing autobiographically, but I think paying attention to the things that you notice in the world. Yeah.
Now, as you know, we both teach at Syracuse. Is there a way, when you're working with our students, is there a way to get them to do what you just described? I mean, of course you can tell them, but are there, I guess what I really want to know is, what do you see the main thrust of your teaching to be? We have, 700 applications a year, only 6 people come. So they're incredible students. How do you approach that work?
I think with all, I teach the undergrads too. So I teach some students who are very much beginners, and the graduate students are already pretty great when they get here. So it's very different in some ways. But one thing I think is useful is, aside from the things I just said, is, how do you avoid cliches, not just of language, but cliches of thought, which is also a way of saying stereotypes. So when I was writing about Sam, I really didn't want her to be, what you don't want is also important as to what you do want. I didn't want her to be mourning her lost beauty. I didn't want her to be, left by her husband. I was like, there's a world of literature and movies out there. And why are you writing this? Why do we need to hear this? What's new here? And that being able to see with your own eyes, I think is the work of fiction, is just being able to look at something and not have those received ideas informing you, not going to those cliches, not going to those with that easy sort of reductiveness, and not being afraid if things get complicated and dicey and uncomfortable. I think being brave is really a big part of being a writer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Kind of that idea of being wary of the first order solution, and then trusting that something else something better will arrive. You're such a wonderful thinker about the novel form, and I wonder, and this might be a little grandiose or put you on the spot, but can you, in the quiet moment when you're thinking of what you want your novels to do, or what you think novels should do, what do you think?
Well, I think that that's a similar question is you ask yourself, what is it that novels do that other things don't do, right? What that movies don't do,
right.
that records don't do, music, I guess. There's no records anymore, except there are. And I really think of novels as being countercultural. You've heard me say this before, because so much of our experience, we do spend a lot of time reading very shallow, superficial, quick takes on things, you know, on Twitter or on the internet or in emails, things that are hastily composed. And so a novel being something that is, you know, one person's kind of talking to you, and that engagement where you're reading, which is also very active, for a long period of time, for sustained, the duration of it, I think makes it very counter to the way that technology has kind of shaped us culturally. So I do think of the novel as the form itself seems kind of subversive to me. And it's a respite, I think, for a lot of people. I think the buy-in, the purgatory of getting into a novel is harder and harder because there's so many distractions, right? That first chapter is like, if you could just get through it and get in. But then once you're in, you feel a soul release of just being focused and deep for a while and being sustained and not having to answer back immediately to everything, you know, quickly, I think is good. You know, maybe a deeper take on things. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's certainly what this book did for me. I just came out of it so interested in our world again, which is a beautiful thing to feel. So again, if at this point now the book is out, and this might be presumptuous, but has your mind started to turn to the next thing? And if so, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, again, just on behalf of other writers, what is the first flicker now of the next book starting to feel like, if you could share that with us, or is it too early?
I can't, I mean, I would just say that, yeah, I have, this often happens to me. I have like two characters that seem that they might be in different, could have different books, but they probably won't. They probably will be, they're connected somehow. I just haven't figured it out yet, which is, I really think it's important that in writing, you're writing to discover, right? You have questions. And I didn't say that earlier, but you have questions you're trying to answer. That keeps it alive. If there's something at stake for you, you're writing to inquire of the world rather than just say, I have this idea, I'm going to explain to you. You say, I don't know, might be this, might be that. Let's go, let's keep looking and see. And I have this kind of back and forth. So that's my way of avoiding your question, because I'm not going to tell you what my idea is. Because it will,
I think that's what I get it. I get that. Yeah.
It'll make a delayed face. It'll be a funny face of like, ooh, and it will be delayed by a minute, and that will make it worse. And then I'll start crying and never work on it.
Okay, we won't do that. Yeah, I'll withdraw the question respectfully. So you kind of answered this, but I know that, you know, I can remember so well being a young student writer at Syracuse, and a great writer would come, and all I wanted to ask was, you know, give me the distillation of your advice for a young person out there who's made a start on a novel and is, you know, full of doubt, as we should be. Is there some kind of distillation of your approach that might help her as she goes to finish that book?
I think it's really different for each student, honestly. Some students, don't you think, just need encouragement, like, we need to hear from you. This is important. What you're doing is important. And they just need encouragement. They just need you to believe that they have something to say, and that it matters. And being around other writers helps that a lot. And then other students really want a lot of criticism on the form, you know, on the manuscript. And I feel it really just varies depending, trying to listen to what they tell me they need. I think helps a little bit, but I don't know. I certainly don't have a good answer. I keep waiting for the answer. It's hard.
Well, I think that's right.
You know, the thing that's true is that it's hard. And if you do it right, it never stops being hard. It just becomes hard in different ways. Don't you think?
Yes, I do. That's a beautiful answer. Yeah. let's pivot to some of your questions so we don't run out of time. Let me start with Mary. She asks, how many complete drafts are typical for your products?
Well, as I said, I do revise as I go along. So I have a file and I save each day a new a new version of the book and email it to myself. So there's so, so there are many versions in the first draft. So there's a lot of revisions, which is why it takes years for me. And then when I have a draft, then there are probably maybe 3 or 4 revisions after that, once I know what the whole thing is. Just really fixing the things that need to be fixed and getting rid of things that I hate. That's a really important thing, is that, that I had, that you can just get rid of things. You can cut things that if they're not working for a reason. And so that a lot of it is cutting, Right.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Sean asks, hi, Dana, could you talk about what you were reading while writing this? While you're crafting something, do you tend to curate your reading in a way that will contribute to the stew of the thing you're working on? Do your reading habits, instincts change while you're crafting something?
Yeah, there were 2 books that were kind of 3, I would say. I was really, this Leonard Gardner book, Fat City, I was just looking at my notebook and I was writing about it. I love how he talks about Stockton, California in that book. So the sense of place, that inspired me, and how efficiently he got to this complicated place that's both beautiful and ugly. And Syracuse is beautiful, ugly. So those were interesting tensions in the place. And then I was, there's this book called The Stammering Century by Gilbert Seldes that was written at the beginning of the 20th century, that was about the 19th century and about all the reform movements up here. And that really made me kind of excited about the history of Syracuse. But a lot of times I'll just stay away from stuff that has thematic connections to the book or content connections. And it's really more about formal stuff. I did like that Coetzee book, Disgrace, where he blows up his life. And it's a very short book, but it just keeps escalating and escalating, and more consequences and escalating. So there were some formal kind of structural things I thought, okay, can I compress, but also have all this stuff happen? But a lot of times I'm reading research things, like journals from people, primary documents. And I try not to read anything that's content-wise is too close to what I'm doing, because I'm afraid I'll feel inhibited, or that I be contaminated in some way.
Yeah. Cynthia has a really nice question. How surprised are you by the finished novel, or are you surprised?
You mean like where the novel ends up, or the actual feeling of it in your hand when you get it? I think
by this story.
The story, very surprised. Maybe. Very surprised, I think. Not surprised in that I at a certain point, a couple years in, you kind of know where you're going to go and where you're not going to go. So you might know where the end point is, but how you get there is a surprise. And for me, it's that kind of idea that Kundera talks about with Tolstoy, with Anna Karenina, that he had this idea that Anna Karenina was going to be this moralistic book about infidelity. But as he was writing it, he was listening to the book and listening to Anna, and she became a much more complicated character and a much better character. And so I think that listening to your book, which will kind of guide you in a way, so it feels surprising because it feels like it's coming from the consciousness of the book, where that ending, where it's all coming together, and it feels like you're part of a force rather than you imposing your idea on it. If it's going well, that kind of thrust. And I think that's why when I get to the end, I get pretty much like writing all day. Like I get in a rush, and I try not to interrupt. That last 3 months gets to be really manic. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. Someone asks, how dependent are you on your editors? How do you work with editors in a novel manuscript?
Well, I really have been lucky. I've had editors who have really, I mean, Jordan Pavlin, who is my editor for this book, gave me, like, knew exactly what I wanted for the book. And she really helped me make it better, and not make it something else. So that, and just has, I think also just a lot of belief in it being meaningful and worthwhile. And then finding ways to kind of make it a better version of itself. So I think it's incredibly important to have a really smart editor who gets what you're doing, familiar with what you've been doing in your whole career, and can then help you make the book the best version of itself, if that makes any sense. So it seems incredibly important because it's very hard to see your own work, you know? And I think first readers that you have are very helpful in that way too. I have a couple of first readers who are extremely helpful. Jonathan D., my husband, Melanie Jackson, my agent, she read it and had some great comments. It's just very, very helpful, and other writers. So I do really rely on the perspective of others. When I feel that it's done, I don't tend to show it before then because I don't want it to be interfered with. When I understand what it is, then I show it to someone and someone says, I just don't get that part. And you're, okay, I need to fix that. But I know what it is. If it's too early, then it just feels, it's going to shake you off. You have to have clarity about what you want it to be.
Right. Thank you. Diana wants to know, how do you think about the narrator? Who is she to you? Who is the narrator? Sam.
Well, Sam and Allie and Clara, all of them feel like people to me with all the flaws. And they, I think, you know, it is true that you put pieces of yourself in your characters and your experience. But that's different that's not autobiographical. I think Sam is, and also you put some of it's kind of interesting with fiction. I think of that idea that Flaubert had about how you're ordinary in your life, you're settled in your life so that you can be fierce on the page, right? So I am knowing that I'm not reckless the way Sam is, and I'm not brave the way Sam is, you know, won't even cut my hair off the way Sam does. So some of it is playing out something that occurs to you and sort of following it out. And that's the part of the fun of it is just investing something that comes from you, but then exaggerating it and playing it out and combining it with other things that you've observed in other people, and that weird intermingling. So I think of them as real people, and as I'm working on them, you know, that, but it feels very natural. It doesn't feel like something I have to contrive too much. But sometimes, you know,
right.
Yeah, I hope that answers it.
It does. So Zeynep Ozakad, who's one of our wonderful students, wants to know, do you have a ritual to help you get into that poetic sentence rhythm that we were talking about earlier? Is there any way to sort of move yourself over into this space where you're going to start sounding like yourself?
I do really think for me, I believe in dailiness with a novel. You know, you try it for 7 days, you get 5 days out of it, but you keep always in touch with it. And so I am a little bit obsessive about, no matter what is going on, once I'm in, not in the beginning where I'm sort of like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but once I'm in and I'm writing it, that I try to do some, like, even if it's just look at a sentence and play with a sentence when I'm traveling or something, but I try to engage it all the time. So, and always at the same time in the morning, so that you start to get into this mode. You almost have a enchant, or like you mesmerize yourself, so that when you wake up and it's the morning and you have your coffee, your subconscious like, oh, here's all this crap I have for you that I noticed that would be for the book. And it's that dailiness, it's like a habit, right? And so it just becomes a kind of alternate life that you have to feed, and you start noticing things in the world for your purpose. And then you get that weird, and I'm sure you've had this, George, where you get that synchronicity where you start it starts invading the rest of your life. And that's a good sign where you're just watching a movie and you're taking a note for your novel, and you're looking at the paper, you're taking a note for your novel, and you're like, everyone is talking about the things in my novel, but it's really just your brain has become a machine novel. And it's really kind of demented. I mean, it is, right. It's a little bit crazy, but then it ends and you have this novel. Yeah.
And we're lucky to have it. So Evie wants to know, other than creating space and place for your work, how has living and teaching in Syracuse influenced your work?
Well, I think it's an interesting place, you know. I'm one of those people who find most places interesting. It is very cold here in the winter, so that's good for writers because you stay inside and write. And I have a really good community of in the MFA with both the faculty and with the students, and they inspire me because the students are rigorous and energetic and young, damn them. And so you want to, you know, keep up. They help keep you on your toes, and they read things you haven't read, and that's exciting and challenging. So I think it does kind of keep you engaged to sort of have all these young writers around you who are so smart.
Yeah. Now, so let me give you two sort of related, maybe semi-technical questions. We got about 5 minutes left. So one is from Jackson Franz, who we know and love. How do you work with the text within the text that tend to show up in your novels?
Right.
In this case, the Loomis letters. Are those sort of notebook things that you then find a place for, or they're coming more out of the linear process of working through the book? Let's take that one on first, and I'll go to Patrick McCarthy's question.
Okay, next. Yeah. So I do, in the book, I do have lots of other formats, and I would just say that about, I do think it's really interesting to think about what it's like to be alive now as part of your writing, even if you're writing about the past. So you're always kind of speaking to this moment. And I do try to incorporate different formats in the book to kind of get at this weird torqued version. So there'll be like Facebook groups, or there'll be, there's all sorts of, there's a Yelp review of this historical house. And then there's these letters from the 19th century. And one point there's a pamphlet at another point. And I think partially it's just that I really like when I'm reading when different things come in and you're just doing it with prose, but you're trying to create a sense of this fragmentary world or this collage of a world. And you can, and I like white space. I think white space is a nice thing in a novel. It gives you a little breathing room. And I mean, that's what I loved about Lincoln and the Bardo is you got like these different formats and then variations within them and the white space. And it's exciting as a reader, I think, for me. I mean, I'm doing what would interest me. So, and I do, I kind of had a feeling those Loomis letters were going to have to be written early. I mean, I knew that she would come in because I thought, well, here she is. Everyone thinks they know who she is. And what if I saw her when I thought it would be the bad letters, but instead it's her when she's young and idealistic, kind of like Allie, thinks she knows the world, but she doesn't really know the world. And she gets herself in a bad situation. I didn't realize that until I got much closer to it, that that's what letters would be in the book. And I was dreading writing them. I was doing so much research because I'd never written anything like that. I was going and staying at Oneida and going to lectures and doing this and reading journals. And then one day I just said, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I have it. I have this language. I do. And then wrote them. And I did end up showing them to, do you know Carol Faulkner? She's an SU professor who knows about that era and Oneida very well. And I was like, she's like, yeah, that's good. She had a couple language things that you had to work out, but it was great. Yeah. So I think, you kind of, you just convince yourself you can do it and you do it. And then you check with people and make sure it seems convincing, people who know. So I do a lot of like interviewing people and asking for help. You'll see in my acknowledgements, there's a lot of people I ask for help from,
That's what it shows. So now from Patrick, I'm sorry, this is like a speed round kind of, but I want to try to get to as many as we can. Patrick wants to know, how do you handle multiple perspectives of voices? I feel like it makes the clarity of a story, exponentially more confusing, which makes it harder to write. I think he's talking about his own work there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think again, as a reader, I do like, I mean, I think that you don't want to make things more complicated unless they need to be complicated, right? So initially I thought it would be just Sam, and then I realized actually it would be more interesting if we could see Sam through her daughter's eyes and see the daughter through Sam's eyes, and that tension. And so I think that it kind of comes out of necessity, but you know, any narrative decision you make, if you have it narrated all by one first person narrator, that there's limits and complications in that. You do the third person. I mean, all of these decisions have consequences in your writing. They're all equally difficult, I think. There's no easy answer to that. But I didn't want to alternate first person in this book. I really wanted to have the flexibility of that third person, so it wouldn't feel like so many eyes, you know, even though you're so in their head that it feels like an I, but you still have their names and the she's in there, if that makes any sense.
Right. All right. So I think we're out of time. I want to thank everybody so much. With one more question from Karen, who asked, how do you know when your work on a novel is finished?
That's a tough question. I mean, for me, I know what the ending is, and that seems clear. But I would, I revise, tweak sentences up until they rip it out of my hands, frankly. So, and if I go and read this now for paperback, I'll have a couple. I can never stop, frankly. Yeah.
That's the sign of a true artist, which you certainly are. Dana, thank you so much for the generosity and insights that you gave us. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the Center for Fiction for hosting us.
Thank you, George. And thank you everybody for coming. I'm so grateful for everybody being here, and for you, George, and Center of Fiction. Thank you so much.
Don't forget to buy your copy if you haven't yet. Get the signed copies from Center for Fiction. Buy them as gifts for all the people that you love too. George and Dana, thank you both so much. And thank you to all our guests for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.